Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. I'm thrilled to introduce our speakers and also dive into an exciting session on adaptive teaching strategies, personalising learning for every student in Power Maths. So just before we begin, we have a couple of quick housekeeping points. Firstly, we are recording this webinar. So for those of you who are currently Power Maths users, the session will be available on ALP in the classroom support area. And if you're not currently a Power Maths user, you will receive a link to the YouTube recording following the session. Please feel free to revisit the recording or share it with your colleagues afterwards. If you have any questions during the presentation, please use the Q&A function. This helps us track your queries and ensure we get back to you. At the end of the session, we'll have an exciting Q&A session with our presenters. Now, without further ado, let me introduce our presenters. So first up, we have Tony, the series editor for Power Maths and the founder of White Rose Maths. And joining him is Josh Lury, our lead author for the Power Maths content. So Tony and Josh, over to you.
Thank you, Tara. Good afternoon, everybody. Great. Thank you for joining our session this afternoon on adaptive teaching strategies linked to Power Maths. So for those that have joined previous ones that Josh and I have done, the plan is that I will go through some of the theory behind what we're doing, and then Josh will pick up some of the practice. So he'll talk through some Power Maths lessons and how you can put some of the things that I spoke about today into practice. So let's begin. If we can get this going. So firstly, just want to make sure we all understand what we're talking about when we talk about adaptive teaching. It's a phrase that's come into being used more and more over the last few years. And this idea that's about responding flexibly to children's needs by adjusting teaching methods, resources, interventions to help all learners succeed. And I think there are a couple points to make on this. Firstly, that those that are planned for. So there's those responding. So you're thinking about, right, how am I going to respond flexibly and plan for that responding flexibly or supporting learners, etc., etc. And then you've also got that dynamically responding within lesson based on children's answers or something else, etc., etc. So that's what we're going to talk about by adaptive teaching today. This idea of responding flexibly to children's needs by adjusting teaching methods, resources. Now, you'll be very pleased to know that Power Maths, we have designed it to be used as flexibly as possible. And I think sometimes there's a misconception with Power Maths that it should be quite rigid and everything else. The structure we've tried to design, there is a structure to it, which we encourage people to follow, but we also do encourage people to use it flexibly. And hopefully Josh will talk a bit more about that in detail when we get to it. So why is this idea of adaptive teaching really important? So firstly, I think we all recognize that each lesson comes with different prior knowledge, misconceptions. Children arrive with different prior knowledge, misconceptions, learning speeds, etc. We've got this idea of struggling learners feeling like we don't want them to get left behind, but also we've got this idea of quick graspers, or whatever you want to call them, staying challenged as well. We've all taught these classes where you've got these different speeds, these different prior knowledge, and it's how we still have this form of whole class teaching. And I think the other thing about adaptive teaching is it does encourage greater reason and problem solving rather than just the idea of procedural learning. So hopefully that will come across in here. So I think this, for me, just exemplifies great teaching. I think plenty of great teachers already do this, okay, and for many it's developing as well. So firstly, the main part of what I'm going to talk about are the principles of high quality adaptive teaching. So the first principle I want to talk about is really this whole class teaching and this idea of everyone together. I would say for me, that's a really important principle of adaptive teaching. I think differentiation, in my opinion, was very much where you might have different tables working on different things. Whereas I believe adaptive teaching for me is about this whole class teaching everyone together. And I think that's been pushed by Math Subs, okay, rightly being White Rose does that, and Power Maths, we encourage that as well. This idea that trying to keep everyone together, bearing in mind all those things that I talked about on the previous slide about there might be all at different starting points, etc., etc. But the idea around really adaptive teaching is, as much as possible, we're going to try and keep this whole class together. And I think linked to that then is you've got to have high expectations, right? So when you've got your class and you want to keep them together, I think it's really important that you get high expectations and of all the children. but it's being ready, planned for, or respond to this idea of needing to scaffold some, to support some, and then also extend some as well. And I'm sure Josh will point out to you later that the teacher guides, the supporting materials for Power Maths give lots of ideas to support learning and also extend learning, but I'll let Josh talk about those later. And then I think what this whole class teaching comes with, this absolute pillar comes with that high quality explanations, clarity, and multiple representations. And I've gone around many schools now, seeing Power Maths being used and being taught really well, and in some schools not as well. But I think where it's being taught well is where teachers have just made sure that they've got the explanation that they want to give the children's clear in the head and supported by the content that's in the textbook. So just wanted to say that really. So the first principle is this idea of whole class teaching, high expectations for everybody, but ready to scaffold and extend, and then supported by high quality explanations with a real clarity of, right, this is how to do this. This is what we're going to be doing. So that's the first principle, in my opinion, of adaptive teaching. The next one is then whether whatever you want to call this. Some people call this AFL, some people call it other things. Really, this idea of continuous formative assessment in the lesson. You make some assumptions as you start this lesson, and you are continually assessing that every single answer that every single child gives as you walk around the class, as you do whole class discussion, whatever that happens to be, you're using formative assessment at all time. You're listening to what children are saying, listening to what they might be doing, they might be thinking, etc., and then using things like diagnostic questions. Some of the questions in the Think Together or other sections can be used as a diagnostic thing to check understanding, and there's this constant live feedback taking place for children between student and between teacher and student, teacher and child. So I think there is this idea of adaptation based on what answers children are given. So you've got your plan, and it needs to be well thought through. And Josh will talk about making sure you've looked at the lesson ahead, because we've seen lessons where it's clear the teacher hasn't looked at the lesson ahead. So make sure that prep is done before, and then thinking about maybe what might be some key questions to ask. Which of the Think Together questions might be a key question to make sure I know that most children have got this part of this topic. And again, Josh will talk you through some examples. And then I've made this point already, but the idea is that you're adjusting teaching in real time based on their responses. And that for me is a large part of adaptive teaching. So the slide before was about whole class together. The next one was this idea of this continuous formative assessment, where you as a teacher are thinking about the answers and not just and thinking about what they're saying and adapting then in real time. And again, Josh will show you how you can do this with some of the lessons very shortly. So then, one of the things I talked about earlier on was this idea of having high expectations for all. And I know it can be challenging when you've got learners in a group who maybe are working, I don't know, 2-3 year groups below where they maybe need to be. I totally understand that. I think that's a challenge that lots of schools face, and it becomes increasingly so as more schools are moving to mixed age. I think there are interventions that could take place outside the classroom. And again, Josh will give you some ideas of those later on. But then it's thinking about, right, if I'm in a class, what can I do to support those children that I know struggle with certain concepts? So if I'm moving on to place value within 10,000, right, does that mean that and I've got children who don't know place value to 100 or 1,000, does that mean they can't tackle the 10,000? Interestingly, we had some data from White Rose recently that showed that children seem quite confident with the basics right up to 1 million. Okay, the deeper understanding, though, yeah, there was massive differences. So what I'm trying to say there is, rather than lowering expectations and saying, right, you guys are working on hundreds, you guys are working on thousands, when we're maybe working into 10,000s, maybe think about what can I do to support those children who I know need a bit more support. Maybe there's just a few more questions for them to do. Maybe as part of my teaching, I'm going to make sure that I do some of I check that understanding. Maybe I do a bit of pre-teaching. And again, Josh will talk about a few more of these things shortly. I think then another principle of this idea of adaptive teaching is there needs to be clear worked examples, support voice sentence stems, manipulatives, etc., etc. So again, this is a way of making sure that all children can succeed. The clearer the worked example, and I'm not saying we got Power Math perfect, but hopefully you are seeing, having using it, that lots of great examples, lots of clarity, lots of representations as well to bring it to life. We use sentence stems, okay, that you can you put your own sentence stems. NCTM have got their own sentence stems. White Rose do as well. So there's lots of sentence stems which will help all children. And then clearly that idea of use of manipulatives. So all these things will support high quality adaptive teaching. And then the idea is that once we're supporting the lower learners with all these things here, we gradually want to remove that scaffolding so that children become more confident. And again, we built Think Together in this I do, we do, you do approach. That's how we've built it together. Now, what it's not necessarily, what you might not see is question one is I do for everything, and then we do is question two, and then you do. That's not necessarily how it would work. Within question one, you might see question one, right? So this question on the right hand side, you might say, right, I'm going to do this for question part A first. I'm going to talk through it, clear explanation, ask a few questions to make sure I'm testing understanding, maybe use some mini whiteboards, etc. And then children have a go with you or with the part together, and then they have a go on themselves. So you might be doing I do, we do, you do within a question, not just over a full set of Think Together. But that is all these are underpinning principles, in my opinion, of what adaptive teaching is. Right. Next principle of adaptive teaching is you really need to expose the misconceptions and address them. I hope you can see with Power Maths that we do try and do that. We do try and show you misconceptions, and we do try and address them. On the right hand side, you can see this misconception of quarters. This idea that we've got 3 markings between 0 and 1. Are they all? Does Jamie's number line go up in quarters? We're trying to address through the characters this idea of misconceptions, and so your job, okay, is to just make sure that when you're scanning the lesson, when you're looking at the lesson, that you're thinking, right, oh yeah, that's the misconception, to try and draw it out there, etc., etc. It might be a common error, it might be a misunderstanding. And then in your planning, just make sure you're proactively planning for them, thinking about what they do. And again, the teacher guidance does help. I know there's a lot of teacher guidance, but there is a specific section on misconception. So if anything you look at that section is what I would encourage. And then other principles of high quality adaptive teaching, we should be challenging all learners, right? So every single learner but what I would say with that is challenge for all learners may look different. Challenge for one learner might look different for another, right? The higher retainers might be asked questions on deeper thinking tasks. What's the saying? What's different? Convince me that all even numbers end in a 2, 4, 6, 8 or a 0 or something along those lines. So there's different types, rather than getting them just to move on to some other questions and some other thing, right? Think about, right, what can I do to encourage these learners, okay, who are confidently grasp something, to think a bit deeper, but we're talking about the same content. So that's something else. And clearly one way of doing that would always be, you could encourage children to provide multiple solutions or other things along those lines. Other strategies that you might want to do in terms of thinking about adaptive teaching is around really this idea of live marking and feedback. Again, that fits in with the AFL type of thing. And different schools have different interpretations of live marking. That certain people have models, others some will just describe it as going through answers. So whatever you see as live marking, you as a teacher, you want to be continually assessing how children are doing and making sure that they've got to. Now, sometimes that means that you might not do one full lesson in a lesson, because you know what? They're struggling with adding 2-3 digit numbers together where you need to exchange or something along those lines. Then it's fine just to say, right, you know what, we're going to just focus a bit more on this because I want to get this right. I'm realizing, so we're going to do a bit more. We're going to do a bit more we do. We're going to do a bit more you do. We're going to do a bit more together as a class. Whatever that happens to be, use it flexibly And then the next lesson, you might come on to more of the challenge questions, or you might want to just revisit some of the other problems. So just do bear that in mind. But that feedback, that marking that's taking place, there wouldn't be a webinar without me mentioning with mini whiteboards. I think mini whiteboards are absolutely critical to learning. Okay, and I think those are again great AFL strategies. We've got Josh and I have gone around schools where they've turned some of the discover tasks and some of the challenge tasks into more of goal-free problems, or use them as a bit of an anchor task as well. So just those are all things that you can do. So again, you can use it flexibly. And so what some schools have done, they've just zoomed in on a particular page, on a particular challenge, and said, right, what could the question be? Let's think of the questions that it could be. What does it make you think about? What does it make you feel, etc., etc. Pre-teaching, which I know Josh will talk to you briefly about, and that might be, again, could be for all learners in a class. Okay, so you want them all to make sure they've got an understanding, or it might be for a small group of children in a class as well. So whatever that might be, and that might be, for example, for a small group who are maybe you looking at place value to a particular number, you might want to just remind them what the different place values are, etc., etc. Or for the whole class, you might ask them to do the same right up to 1 million, for example. And then clearly there are different forms of intervention that we see. So we see some schools who do same day intervention, which means that there's pretty quick marking taking place, say between lesson 1 and lesson 2, because there's a break or assembly in between. So we've seen that take place. We've seen other examples of intervention where it's maybe on an afternoon or before school or after school, where they're working with a learning assistant, teaching assistant, or a teacher themselves. So these are all different types of intervention which could be considered really. So that sums up where I think what we think how Power Maths can suit adaptive teaching strategies. And I'm going to hand over to Josh now, who will probably give you more of a sense of taking 1 or 2 lessons and some resources, just to go into a bit more detail about putting some of those things I've said into practice, which is probably where you'll get an even better understanding. So Josh, I'm going to stop there and hand over to you.
Thanks, Tony. Really interesting to have those thoughts again. One takeaway from what Tony was presenting for me is that I've got 2 aspects of adaptations that I might make. One is reactive, where I notice something going on and therefore I use my teacher experience and my skill and my knowledge of the resource that I'm using to be able to respond to that. And the first one is that proactive approach, where I look at what I'm going to teach, I think about what I'm going to teach, I think carefully about my knowledge of the resource, and then I prepare for meeting what I predicted might happen as a result. And that's what I wanted to start with a little bit today. So thanks, Tony. I think it helped clarify in my head the different things that I'm going to talk about there. Bear with me. I'm going to. So if I just explain it, basically, I've picked out a couple of lessons, and I'm going to just drop in a couple of ideas that might exemplify what Tony was talking about there. And then as a second sweep through, I'm going to look at Power Maths and the Active Learn platform a little bit more broadly and signpost where there are some useful resources that are tucked away that you might not have noticed that could support some of your thinking in a sustained way, rather than have to just do what Josh and Tony say. You can use these and you can find out how they can help support your teachers and support your own teaching in school. So there are 2 approaches there. So the first one, I've just picked out a lesson, and yeah, we'll have a look at that. So just give me a moment. I was going to think, first of all, very simply about some fluency adaptations, because one thing that happens when I ask teachers, what is it that you find a barrier for some of your students? Very often they say it's the fluency. They can access what's happening in the lesson, they can access the content, they're intrigued and curious, and then what blocks them from being able to do some of their thinking is their lack of confidence with fluency. I want to just draw that slightly further back before and talk about a principle we have when we're working with teachers in the early years, which is this question here. Do students expect maths to make sense? And actually, from research, there is evidence that just suggests some children, yeah, they expect maths to make sense. They're there. They think there are going to be patterns. There are going to be some tools they can use. There are going to be some habits of thinking that they can do, and then they're going to make sense of it. And that's their expectation. They might not verbalize that, but that is their predisposition. And conversely, there are children for whom maths just, it feels like a sea of things happening. And sometimes the number 7 pops out, sometimes the triangle pops out, and then other times it looks upside down and they don't know what's happening, and it just seems like a bit of a blur. My understanding is that the research shows that for the children who have an expectation that maths is going to make sense, not that they've got the answer, not that they know exactly what to do, but just that they have that predisposition, they are more likely to have success in their mathematics education as they move through it because of that expectation. So I'm just gonna refine that question slightly, and because this comes up again and again, do your students expect to use known facts? There's a specific version of that question, perhaps for thinking about some of the older students. And my thinking is, it's not, if we don't want to be making the adaptations constantly making adaptations day on day, but can we set up certain predispositions in the class where we can put some principles in play so that the children start to do the adaptations, and actually they have some mechanisms where they don't have to use some of the adaptations every day. So do students expect to use known facts? I'm going to just picked out this lesson. So here's the discover task from this lesson. We've spoken before about discover task, making the most of that, having discussion, and so on and so on. Effectively, what this question boils down to is they have to recognize that they have to do the calculation 245 plus 4 as a first stage of that. So we're in the arena of wanting to use some known facts to be able to add the ones. That's the kind of lesson that we're working in. However, there will be some students who are not expecting to do that. Their way of expecting is just to do some counting on fingers, or to rely on looking at a addition grid or something like that. And so what can we do as teachers to adapt the way of thinking and adapt the philosophy behind their own thinking so that they're expecting to do it? So if we have a look, I've taken the think together from this lesson, and then I've just combined that with some part whole models. So what I've done here is I've just provided a scaffold where I haven't given them the exact pinpointed and signposted exactly where the answer is that they need, but I have provided a stimulus to say, look, we've got some known facts here, and these are the known facts we're working with on either side of the screen there. Let's expect that some of these are going to be useful. Now, as a teacher, I could leave them like this. I could display them and then remove them. I could ask the children to jot them down. I could cover up different aspects of it. I could use them however I want to use them. But what I'm doing is I'm scaffolding to the whole class to say, look, we're all going to expect that when we're going to be doing some of these calculations, these known facts are going to be useful. And if they don't know the facts at the moment, I can leave them on the board and say, look, by the end of this lesson, do you recognize it's going to be really useful to have some of these known facts? Let's just absorb some of these, and at the end of the lesson, we'll remember some of them. Anyway, so by presenting them like this, I've given a structure to the way that we're working so that the students have to choose. Well, actually, yeah, you've given me some facts there, but I have to identify which one I have to use to solve each of the problems. And you can see by talking through the problems which of those are there. So we've got some that are useful, some that aren't. I could choose to refine it and say, look, these are for question 1, these are for question 2, or I could leave the whole lot there so that the class are working on them. But what I'm trying to do is not just spoon feed them the actual number fact, but just set up the expectation that number facts are useful. And then another thing that Tony mentioned is that when we're thinking about adaptations, a lot of our thinking goes, how can I support children who are struggling a bit? But also we've got those other areas where we want to support the children who want to push a little bit deeper, are more intrigued. So having added some of this into my lesson, as we look through these, I can then harness that and say, well, look, let's just take a breath, actually. Let's just work on some like this. So I've just drawn out some thinking. Some of these, that's just me writing calculations that are going to use some of these part whole models. And you can see that I've gradually reduced some of the information that's available in those part whole models. So that's just me as a teacher, just stepping into the middle of the lesson and saying, look, let's harness some of that. What have we remembered? They're there on the screen. I can push a little bit more and start to say, oh, is this there every time? What can we do with these? How do we have to adapt our thinking? And if it's not there on the screen, what do I do to build up my known facts, and how can I work on that? So I just wanted to drop that in as a little bit of adaptation around not providing the answers, but setting up that expectation that maths is going to make sense, and also that known facts are useful and that they are going to be useful in solving these calculations. So then this is from the Think Together 2 of that lesson. Again, I can make the choice. Do I want to be the person that's providing the number facts, or am I happy that we've set up the expectation and now as a breath we say, right, what part whole models might be useful here, or what number facts might be useful here? Let's get them ready first, and then let's have a look at solving it. And then this is the final of the challenge there. And again, you can see actually that it's all of that whole lesson is nudging us towards this sense that the number bonds are useful. And just by scaffolding that at the front end of the lesson, I don't then have to provide that all the way through if the children then habituate into thinking, oh, I'll go and fetch those number facts that I need. They could be in my memory. They could be in my short-term memory because I've just learned a couple of them. They could be something that I'm developing over time. Anyway, there's one aspect of proactive adaptive teaching that I can drop in to that there. So that was just one thing I wanted to mention. And obviously you can do the same thing with times tables. You could do the in fractions lessons, in division lessons. You could have use that flexibly, but it's all about setting up that expectation that maths make sense and that number facts and known facts are going to be useful. And then try, as a teacher, you just help them develop the skill. Oh yeah, I can learn these number facts. So that was just something I wanted to start on that I think has got a particular relevance to most of those number lessons that are around calculations.
Josh, sorry, can I just ask, would you do sometimes that at the start before the lesson, or yeah, just could you because you did it there throughout, could you see a point of doing some at the start of the lesson as well, just out of interest?
Yeah, absolutely. At the start of the lesson, or as a little bit of pre-teach with some of the children, or however, just the principle, I suppose, behind it is however you use it, it's that it's not there replacing their thinking it's there just setting up that expectation. Yeah, I can use this. So however you distance it from the actual lesson, yeah, I think that's a valuable question. Thanks. And then moving on to what Tony said then about a bit more of the reactive approach, where you're looking around a lesson, perhaps you're doing some live marking or just looking over some shoulders, just getting a sense of what's going on. Just wanted to share a lesson that I'd picked out. So let's have a look here, and then trying to draw on some of the resources that are available. So hopefully there you should be able to see a lovely lesson with some geometric fish. Tony, is that available? Can you see that? Give me a thumbs up if that's perfect. Yep. There. Okay, great. So if we're in this lesson, I just picked this one out at random. So this is in year 5. It's a lesson where what we're wanting the children to do is to work on estimating the area and then this pushes this idea of working with whole squares and half squares. So it could be that I know by looking at this lesson which of the students already are going to find that straightforward and which the ones who are going to find that a little bit confusing, or the way it's presented on this page for one particular child might be confusing and I might want to make some early adaptations there. But the other thing might be that I noticed that some of them are working a little bit faster. So I'm just going to go through this and I wanted to draw out that actually I'm making this expectation that it's something around this combining half squares that may or may not cause some bother, or it might be that the tabulation causes some bother of the problem. But I'm just aware that these might be aspects of the lesson that could be causing some issue. And I am at any stage thinking to myself, do you know what? I'm ready to jump out of the flow of this lesson as it's prepared and just stop and just take a breath and just do some work on the side of this. So it could be that we are looking at, I've got some squared paper on the board, or I've got on my flip chart and we're doing some work on like that. I just, at any stage, I'm ready to just pause and say, well, look, this is something that people will find difficult here. And it could be about counting up the half squares to join them together, or it could be about writing it out in this table, and so on and so on. So, and also being aware that there are children that might have a slightly different approach, because here this is what it's not that common that actually Think Together is as prescriptive about using a particular method, but here we've got the table in in number 2 here, but actually there could be some students who've got quite a neat way of solving it. And I'm looking at that triangular sail there. They might have a pretty good way of solving that themselves. So at every stage through that, I'm ready to stop, jump out of that, and I'm thinking, do you know what? Already off the top of my head, I can think of some really good practical, hands-on, creative, colourful activities that we can do with squared paper, perhaps with loops of string or over some squared paper, or perhaps with some tissue paper over some squared paper, and we can have some fun counting the squares and so on and so on. However, that's me. I had many years of teaching classes with this topic. There might be teachers that you're working with in your school who aren't as confident. So I thought one thing we could look at would be, what does Power Maths also supply as part of the background that could support some of the teachers to think, oh, how can I move other children on? How can I support some of the teachers? So if I just go to a different share, stop that sharing there, and I'm going to go into the Active Learn platform and look at the unit as it is there. So you should now be able to see the Active Learn platform, and we're going to look at this here. So there. Here we go. Here's the unit overview. So here's the page, Unit 10, measure perimeter and area. I'm sure that you know that there's the teacher guide, all of the other bits, the teaching tools that you've got there, the online teaching tools, and then we've got access to each of the individual lessons. I just wanted to highlight further down, as we look further down, there's the end of unit check, which Tony mentioned had some diagnostic opportunities in that. One thing I want to say about that is that, yep, they look like a quiz. A, B, C, D as multiple choice options, and they're in the textbook there. And so if you're looking at that, one key to working with diagnostic questions is not just thinking, what have they got the right answers, but it's listening in to what the children say when they're trying to answer it, listening in to if they've made certain mistakes. What is their actual thinking going on there? So the end of unit check is designed to be an opportunity to really listen into, oh, I saw you chose option C there. Can you tell me why you chose option C? What was your thinking? Why did you think C was better than B? And so on and so on. So it's not just have they got all the answers right, but it's a really good opportunity to have some of those diagnostic conversations with the children so that you can see the actual mechanics of their thinking. Also, we've got here follow-up activities, we've got strengthen activities and deepen activities. I've just drawn out an example of the strengthen activities that go with this. Sorry, bear with me. And I'll dig those out. Apologies there, right. I'm going to have to click on the strengthen activity. Bear with me for a moment. That should open up. Right, I'll just share that screen now. If I click on that strengthen activity, it gives me a page of a resource which is built around a misconception. So having done some diagnostic work, it suggests this misconception may happen. And then it gives you a very simple step through of a process of 4 stages, in this instance, of working with the children, just to script a little bit of post-teaching, a little bit of intervention work with the students, gives us some ways of thinking about different misconceptions. This lesson, when estimating the area of shapes, children may disregard shapes that are not whole or count every part square as a whole. And then it just gives a really nice, simple breakdown of an activity that you can do with a group of 2 or 3 or 1 student, just to work with them in a reactive way if you can diagnose that this is an issue that they've got. So you don't have to just rely on thinking up your own ideas of how to work with your formative assessments or your diagnostic assessments. There is support within Power Maths as well. Further, if I go back into the Active Learn platform, there is also, as we move further down, options for practice and extra challenge. There's a link to an enrich activity that has got a problem-solving activity that you can use with students who might want to look at the concept in a different way, who might need to push at it slightly. Also, there are these Pinpoint, which is a different resource, which has got some problem solving and reasoning challenge cards. So that's what I've drawn out here. So here we've got some from perimeter in it, that perimeter unit that was linked with the area unit. Here we've got some to do with the area and perimeter of rectangles, and so on and so on. So for each of the units, as well as having the strengthen and deepen activities, it's also got a link to Pinpoint activities, which has got some of the problem solving things that you can work with other students or give to students who might respond to those as well. So again, you're not having to always think about your own activities. So I just wanted to highlight some of those that are available there. That's talking about two different bits there. Another thing that Tony talked about was, well, what happens if we're working with students who are working, let's say, a couple of years below or 3 years below the rest of the class, or perhaps pre-key stage, and so on and so on. That's a question I get asked quite a lot. I was just going to draw out from if I go to the home page of Active Learn, the planning guidance, we've got at the top of the page, lots of different planning documents. I just wanted to move further and further down, and something that might be useful that is buried in the mixed age planning. Even if you're not working in a mixed age setting, I think one part of this could be particularly useful if you're thinking about children who are working 1 year below, 2 years below, 3 years below, perhaps at pre-key stage. In this area here, mixed age planning, week to week matching, this document called Mixed Age All Years. In that document, I went through the whole of Power Maths, and I tried to find progressions of lessons from year to year that build the concepts over time. So I'm going to open that document, and I'm going to switch to that and just show you something that might be useful when you're thinking, how do I work with students I want to keep them working in the same area, but I might want to look at earlier year groups and think about how they've approached it in earlier year groups. So that is available. Yeah, bear with me for. Let's find that. Right. So when you open that document, it looks like this. And so what I've done is I've taken each of the concepts. So you can see it here. See, I've drawn it out into place value. See, these are the place value concepts: counting and place value. And then here are the year 1 lessons, year 2 lessons, year 3 lessons, year 4 lessons that are in that conceptual area. Likewise, as we go through, here is, let's say, partitioning. Here are the year 1 lessons that really focus on partitioning, year 2 lessons, year 3 lessons, year 4 lessons, year 5, and so on and so on. Here's the flow of lessons that are looking at numbers in the linear number system, being able to use number lines effectively, being able to place number lines on the numbers on the number line, and so on and so on. So another aspect that I could look at to support my adaptive teaching would be saying, well, let's say I'm teaching a child in year 4, a class in year 4, where we're all working on this lesson on numbers in the linear number system. What can I use? What can I look at from earlier year groups to really draw on how that would have been built up over time, and how can I use that to make adaptations for some of the students in my class, or how can I use that to support my own thinking for how we could build that up for lots of the class? And I would imagine that actually, if you looked at the previous year groups 3 lessons here, that might help you with some of your decisions anyway before you start teaching the lesson for the whole class. And as we go through, so it's got for each of them comparing and ordering numbers. You can see aspects of it that get really front loaded into year 1 and year 2, and then there's less of it appearing in later year groups. But actually having access to, oh yeah, I could harness some of the thinking from some of those early lessons. That would be useful. Rounding, Roman numerals, and as you see, then we've got some same as we go through. So that document, I think, it came out a little bit similar to the Ready to Progress document that some of you may have seen, where it's got these horizontal flows of progressions through lessons. So I think that could be really useful in making decisions about how to support children who are working. It can keep the class together, like Tony spoke about. I just stopped sharing that one there. Another resource that's available on the platform, and Tony's touched on this idea of making interventions and also perhaps doing some pre-teaching. I'm just going to share back to Active Learn. Here we are. So we should be back on the Active Learn platform now. If I go right back to the start page of this, these are available in the original. If you click on that planning box there, that will take me through to sorry, I clicked on the wrong bit there. If I click on the resources, sorry, below the planning there, this first resources icon there, one thing that's available that could be useful for doing some pre-teaching, could be useful for doing a little bit of support, or perhaps if a student needs to go back over a concept. These pupil videos here, originally I'd written these as part of lockdown materials, and they were available. They were used as part of the BBC's home learning. So they are designed to be independently accessible by students. They're designed to go really quite gradually through a lesson and present some of the core aspects of how to access the thinking. They use really carefully orchestrated but really simple animations to highlight some of the concepts. So they sort of take the lesson and they just turn it into a little video. I'm just going to share a sample of one. There isn't one for every single lesson, but there are 100 available overall, so there's plenty to look at there. And so we're just gonna watch one of these from, I think it's from year 3, could be year 4, on the topic of equivalent fractions, and you can just get a sense of what they are and how you might be able to use them. So here we are here. Just going to set the context. So this is I won't show the whole video, it's 8 minutes long. This is in a lesson about finding equivalent fractions. The discover task is the children have got some number cards and they have to make equivalent fractions. And it comes after a day of them working with fractions on a number line, fractions on a fraction wall, and just finding them, which can be quite process-based, just line up the lines and so on and so on, and actually can mean that the children get stuck on that and don't understand the link between the numerator and the denominator. This is the next lesson, and this video is just a bit of support for thinking, oh, well, how do the numerator and denominator relate, and what's going on here? So I'll just play that for about 4 or 5 minutes.
The numerator is 1, and the denominator is 2. The denominator tells us that the whole is split into 2 equal parts. Find the fraction 1/2 on this fraction wall. Can you see that it's equivalent to 2/4? We learned that in yesterday's lesson. But Rena can't make 2/4 using her remaining cards because she's already used the 2. So what can she do? Well, you might have spotted that there is another fraction equal to 1/2. If we look at the fraction wall again, can you see that 1/2 is also equivalent to 3/6? Okay, so today we're going to learn something about numerators and denominators with equivalent fractions. We can use our number knowledge to find equivalent fractions instead of having to look at a fraction wall every time. Have a look at this calculation. We know 1/2 and 3/6 are equivalent fractions, but think carefully about the numerators and the denominators here. If you multiply the numerator by 3 and the denominator by 3, then 1/2 turns into 3/6. Let's have a think about how this works. We'll look at the denominators first. In 1/2, the denominator is 2, so the whole is split into 2 equal parts. In 3/6, the denominator is 6, so the whole is split into 6 equal parts. 6 is 3 times 2. You can imagine starting with a whole split into 2 parts. Then, if I split each of those parts into 3 parts, now I have 6 parts in total. I have 3 times as many parts. The denominator has been multiplied by 3. Okay, now let's think about the numerators. The numerator for 1/2 is 1, so we need to think about one of those equal parts. We've multiplied the denominator by 3, so we're thinking about sixths. So each half is now split into 3. One equal part has become 3 equal parts. Remember, I have 3 times as many parts. The numerator has been multiplied by 3. You can imagine splitting the whole into 2 parts, then splitting each part into 3 more parts. Now we have 3 sixths. So that's why we multiply the numerator and the denominator by the same number. So we can complete Rena's part of the puzzle by multiplying her numerator and denominator by the same number. Now let's see if we can help Danny. He hasn't chosen his numerator or denominator yet. Pause and have a think about what he could do.
So I'll just pause it there. Hopefully you can see that these videos are they go really carefully through the concept. We use some really key phrases and repeat the language over and over. There's a mixture of quite formal language, but also slightly informal approach that's accessible and friendly. You carefully choosing one model at a time and then making sure we build the concept gradually. So that could be a really excellent resource to use for a bit of pre-teaching. So I could see that if I'm about to teach this lesson and I'm thinking to myself, do you know what? I think we're going to end up racing through the numbers, and I want a couple of my pupils to have a bit of a leg up before we start the lesson so that they're ready and they're prepared for how that's going to work. Then I could give that, say, oh, I'd just like you to watch this video because that's going to be really helpful. And then you could be really helpful with explaining to our class when we start the whole class when we start the lesson. Or it could be that I notice we've done the lesson, a couple of the children have struggled a little bit, and this could be a really useful video to say, oh, I think it'd be really helpful if you watch this video because this explains it in a slightly different way than the way we did it in the lesson. And I wonder if that would help you. It's got instructions to pause the video, so it's not just a passive experience. Each of the ways. So this video is one of the lengthier ones. This is 8 minutes long, but there are opportunities all the way through to pause it, have a think about what your answer is going to be in a really safe environment, and then when you play again, you can compare what you thought with the video, and it moves us through it. And you can see that hopefully you can see that would be a really helpful resource for working with some of the class. So they're not available for every single lesson, but they are available on there. Just to recap, then before I finish, and I think we might have a little bit of time for some questions at the end. Tony spoke about sometimes you're reactive, sometimes you're proactive. I talked about setting up that expectation for, do the students expect maths to make sense? Do they expect to use their number knowledge? And then we discussed about you could provide some of that number knowledge, or certainly cue some of that number knowledge, so that you're proactive in ensuring that habit is in place, and also that if they start to expect, yes, this is going to happen, this is going to make sense, then or maths does make sense, then you are going to be able to gradually over time build their confidence, and they're going to feel that they can be more successful. Then we looked at a lesson. It was the estimating square area lesson, and we talked a bit about how all the way through there are opportunities where I could just say, do you know what I've noticed by looking over your heads, that you're making this mistake with half squares, and I could do something really practical. It's a lesson that really lends itself to being quite creative or quite hands-on. We could do got some squared paper, we could cut out some shapes and have quite a lot of fun with that. So, but also on the platform there are things like the pinpoint materials, the strengthen and deepen materials that support me or other teachers, or teachers who have not been teaching for so long or are not that confident, with ideas for how they can work with that. Also links to some enrich activities. Then we started to look at what happens so Tony mentioned this, children who are working in different year groups or might need some significant scaffolding, and we looked at that mixed age all the way down on that first planning page. We looked at the mixed age, and it's called Mixed Age All Years, that document. And that could be a really useful way of just being able to go back, thinking, right, I'm going to teach this concept. Let's go back and to see how that's been built over time, and how can that inform some of my thinking. And then finally, there I just mentioned the pupil videos could be another option there. So you've got lots of different sort of tools in your teaching bag there to think, how can I make adaptations, as well as on top of it, as Tony said, just being a really good teacher, an experienced teacher, and making those decisions for yourself, and knowing that Power Maths has been designed to be used flexibly. You making choices about it, not just mechanically going through. Or look, Tony said we've got to discover, then share, then think together, one, think together, two, think together, three. You're the one that can make those calls. So yeah, I'll pause there.
Josh, no, thank you. Just before I think there might be a couple of questions, but just to stress, I know we always pack a lot of things into this, and I think there is a lot there to take in, particularly if you've not seen any of the resources that Josh has shown before. It is a mine of, there's lots of information there. I think the key message for me is, and Josh as well, is not to go away and panic if you haven't seen it and try and use everything all at once. I think for me, it's about going back to that whole class teaching, like Josh has talked about, that clarity of explanation. Those videos help with that. And just, I think the more you teach maths, the more you become better at responding to issues. You learn, if you're new to teaching, Josh and I have gone through many years of teaching where we've heard all the answers that children ever give. And I think there's something about being curious about a children's answer. So if a child ever still gives me an answer that I've got no idea where they get that from, it's a great moment, because I'm so curious as to where that answer's from, and I want to learn where that misconception's from. So don't feel that you have to know all the answers now, if particularly if you're on the start of your journey. But the key thing is about planning for those misconceptions and other things, and planning for adapting, but then also responding and use Power Math flexibly. So thank you for, we know we've thrown a lot at you, but hopefully you found some of that useful. Tara, I think there may be a couple of questions, but I don't know.
That's great. Thank you so much, Tony and Josh. Yeah, that was really great. We've received a couple of questions from the audience, so I'll raise a few of them for you guys to answer now. If you have any questions, audience, and we don't have them today, or you haven't sort of written them in the Q&A box, either you have a couple of minutes to do it now, or feel free to email our customer support teams and we can follow up. So your first question is from Helen. How do you manage good live marking with over 30 children in the class?
Josh, do you want to pick that one up?
Yeah, I mean, I recognise that it's much easier said than done, isn't it? To say, oh yeah, just do some live marking of those 30, 32, 34 children in the class. I was working with a teacher recently who's got 38 in her class, and so I think one option is, if I'm going to be doing live marking, then that needs to be in my head as part of the way that we're working in the lesson. So if I know I'm going to be doing live marking, that might mean that I don't just scatter them off and say some of them are doing this question, some of them are doing this, some of them are racing through. Then I'm going to structure it in a way that I know that I want them all to be working on 1A. I want to just scan around, find out what they're doing, and then because of that, I've got in my head, I'm looking for the children. Really, I'm looking for the ones that have made the mistakes and just go quick. So one aspect is just, do you know what? I'm going to structure it in a way that means I can manage that. So it might be just in those moments of live marking, I'm going to have quite a lot of control over what it is they're going to be doing. I'm going to ask if I've got a TA, which some teachers have and some don't. I want them to be part of that journey. We've had a brief discussion before. Can you look out for the ones that have written 30 when they're trying to do 3.5 times 10? Look out for the ones that have written 30.5, because that's the one that's what I want to find out about. And the other thing is what Tony touched on there is, can we really prize moments where someone's made a helpful mistake? As a class, can we set up the atmosphere where, do you know what? Great. Brilliant, everybody. We've got a really helpful thing to talk about here, because we've found a helpful mistake, and I think this is going to be a really useful thing for us all to talk about. So if we prize that as a class and know that that's a really useful moment, and that the live marking is not just racing around trying to tick everyone's books that they've got the right answers, but the live marking, the purpose of that is finding out where are the things where it breaks down, because that's the useful moment where learning is going to happen. It's not just an exercise in getting everything ticked. It's an exercise in finding those crunch points for where the learning can actually happen. I don't know, Tony, have you got anything to add to that?
No, I think I think one of the problems is that when schools talk to us about live marking, I think that there's people talking about different things as well. So I think some schools there's a very formulaic approach to live marking. In other schools, it's more ad hoc and just going around the class, as Josh said. The one thing I would say is, just ask yourself, if I'm going to do am I doing live marking in this lesson because I've been told I need to do live marking, or what's the purpose of doing live marking in this lesson? Is there another way I could get feedback about particular things? Is there a particular question that you want to know that they can all do? And you're not worried about the 3 or 4 other questions that they're doing. Actually, this is the key question. This is the one that lesson hinges, or whatever you want to call that question. Or do I want to do something diagnostically, or do I want to just assess something really quickly on whiteboard? So I think my question would be, what is the purpose of live marking? And if a class has got 38, do I want to do it in a slightly different way? Can I get, what's the purpose? I want to get this knowledge from children, or what is that I want to work out? So that's my only additional thing to add is because I've seen some teachers who just spend the lesson going around the class, and they spend a minute with each child, and then the problem is that the children are then not doing they're not getting the necessary support, I believe, at other points in the lesson. So that's the only thing I would say. It comes with different things. Sorry, it probably took a bit longer than we thought.
No,
Sorry,
that was great. Thank you. Well, I think we've got time for one more question. So this is from Danielle. What would you suggest is the best way to start the lesson? To use the power up or pre-teach some known facts that will help the children in the lesson?
So shall I go first for this one, Josh?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think every lesson is a bit different, right? When I'm teaching a power math lesson or any lesson that I may be teaching, I know my class better than anybody else. I know where they've been. I know what they can do. If I'm within a particular unit, then I know exactly probably their understanding. I know where they, and so I'm going to just make sure that is right for those children. Okay. So that might be, I know that they're going to struggle with this because they didn't fully get yesterday. So my beginning of this lesson is going to be focusing on some things that I know they didn't get right last time. Some other times I know they did really well yesterday. So you know what? I'm going to try and bring in some knowledge, some understanding, some checks that of learning that we did last week, last month, or something else. So I'm doing something more like that. Other times I want to just a quick starter in terms of, like Josh said, in terms of maybe part whole models, completing those, making their own up or something. I think personally, I'm always thinking about prior understanding of my class and what they need to know for this lesson. And I think every lesson is a bit different, and it all depends on where they got to, where they're going, really. Josh, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I just think it's a really good, useful question. So, Danielle, I think the question you've asked is like, which of those would work? So you could if you think, oh, do you know what? For a week, I'm going to try power ups to start the lesson, and then we don't do any fluency stuff. We just do the power ups, whatever they happen to be, and then we'll launch the lesson. I'll see what happens. I wonder what will happen. And then the next week, I think, do you know what? I'm going to really carefully choose some fluency work to pre-teach at the start of this lesson. I'll do that, and then at the end of that week, the class and I, perhaps a TA, perhaps I've asked maths lead or someone to come in and say, oh, can you help me out here? I'm just trying to find out what happens as just doing this bit of really simple classroom research on a class, just trying to find out, what do you think? What do we think? Ask the children. Did you notice we started like this and then we started like this? Which of those is most helpful? Which do you think helps you learn the most? I think it's a really good question.
That's great. Thank you. I just thought I'd quickly share this for everyone. We've done a new update recently where under the planning page and before you teach, we've added links to previous lessons. And so what that looks like is, if I click on it, it's here, and it just sort of like it links everything that the students have done sort of in the past learning. So that could sort of feed into what you guys are saying in terms of how you start the lesson. So I will stop sharing now, if I can.
I'd forgotten that I'd made that.
Yeah, it's great, isn't it?
I was looking at that thinking, oh, that looks lovely. Who's done that? Oh,
yeah.
I remember. I did that. I remember.
Yeah, it's really good. So I'm really useful. I'm getting great feedback. So please do go out and and have a look. So yes, thanks so much, everyone. That brings us to the end of today's session. Once again, big thank you to Tony and Josh and all of you for joining. There has been a series of webinars, so please do look at our website or on the classroom support section on ALP for all of the recordings if you want to go back and take a look. And as a reminder, the recordings will be there under classroom support on the Power Maths on ALP under the pedagogy drop down. And also they will be uploaded to YouTube when they're ready. So thank you again, everyone. We hope you have a wonderful evening, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one. Thank you.